Well, welcome to VMFA Fridays after 5, Taste of Art. This week, a Taste of Art Virginia wines, Shenandoah and Madison County. I want to welcome everyone who's joining us tonight. And you may be surprised to see me sitting here instead of Celeste Feta, the Director of Education at VMFA. I'm Jeffrey Allison. I'm the Director of Statewide Programs and Exhibitions here at the museum. And as we're doing Virginia wines, we're also going to focus on two works of, or rather two artists who have works in an exhibition that I curated for VMFA on the Road, an Artmobile for the 21st Century, called A View from Home, Landscapes of Virginia. And with me this evening is Matt Adkins from Williams Corner Wine and Liz Skirvin from Amuse. And we're gonna have a wonderful evening, I think, exploring a couple of Virginia wines, some artists who did remarkable images of Virginia. And Liz is gonna share what I can tell you already, because I've seen the images and heard about them, are fantastic pairings. So without further ado, we'll go to the next slide and do a little housekeeping. If you're pairing wine with this program, it's best to open your wines now if you haven't already. I would think especially the red, even though we'll start with the white. You can see us, but we can't see you. We're going to ask for your impressions of the wine as well as the art. And if you'd like to share, please use the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. You can select chat with all panelists or all panelists and the attendees from a drop-down menu to chat. To streamline things, we'll use chat for questions as well, and we'll do our best to answer live rather than in chat. So you can see the illustration there. And again, I want to thank Chase Bank for supporting this program as they have the entire series. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Matt.
Great. Thank you, Jeffrey. We're really glad to be here tonight. We have two really exciting wines from here in Virginia. So on the screen here, you have the map of the Virginia wine growing regions. You can see that we actually have a lot more wine growing regions than you might first anticipate, primarily because you see most Virginia wineries clustered around the Northern Virginia region in the orange right there, and also in the Central Virginia area around Charlottesville in the Monticello AVA. So although Virginia wine has been grown for we've been cultivating vines here in Virginia for over 400 years. The modern history of the Virginia wine industry really starts in the 1960s and really picks up steam in the 70s. We're focusing on two wines today from Central Virginia, one from Early Mountain Vineyards. So the first wine that you have here, if you're playing along at home, you already have a bottle of this, the Early Mountain Five Forks White. And then the second wine here we have is the Lightwell Survey Weird Ones or Wolves. And so they're both, both from that Central Virginia area, the Lightwell Survey being from the Shenandoah Valley. So we start off two wineries, but one winemaker. And that's one thing that really brings these two wines together. So we start off with two wines from Ben Jordan. And Ben is a Shenandoah Valley native, grew up there, and went to, was liberal arts major, ended up going into viticulture, studied in California, and then learned winemaking there, came back to Virginia. A few years later, he's the lead winemaker at Virginia Wineworks in Charlottesville. And since then, in 2015, he started as the head winemaker at Early Mountain Vineyards. His family's been growing grapes in the Shenandoah Valley for about going on 15 years now. And he's also, in addition to Lightwell Survey and Early Mountain, he also makes wines under his family's vineyard label called Midland Construction. So if we can go to the, I think the next slide here. So we start with the Five Forks White. This wine, I think, is really such an interesting wine because it does some really, let me back that up. We start here with Early Mountain Vineyards. We're in Madison, Virginia, in the Blue Ridge foothills, just stone's throw from the border of the Shenandoah National Park. The estate was started in 2005 by the Sweely family, a Sweely estate. And then in 2010, it was sold to Gene and Steve Case, who upgraded the vineyard and renovated it. And 2 years later, it was rechristened as Early Mountain Vineyards. They have about 55 acres of vineyards planted there at the estate, Madison. And then they have a second vineyard site that they purchased in 2015 called Quaker Run Vineyard, which is just north of Madison in Syria, Virginia. So this is a blend. The Five Forks White is named after a small community in the Madison area. What I love about this is that this is a blend that really feels very classic to me as someone who kind of cut my teeth on French wine. This has a very kind of old world feel to it, but also there's a lot of obvious big fruit to it. So it does feel, does have some more American characteristics to the feel of it. What I think is really remarkable too, along with that classic styling of the wine, is that it also has an unexpected element. The blend here is two grapes that are both French, but are not often, if ever, seen together in a blend. So this is primarily Petit Manseng, which is well known here in Virginia, a very good grape for this climate, and Sauvignon Blanc, which makes up the remaining 1/3. There's a tiny bit of Chardonnay and Pinot Gris in here, although its presence is really felt, not heard. So I think that what's engaging to me about this wine is that Petit Manseng is very overtly, it's a very expressive, extroverted grape variety. Usually Sauvignon Blanc tends to be the kind of loud one in a blend. Here you find that the Sauvignon Blanc really plays a supporting role. It's more, you're getting more of the green flavors, some minerality, acidity, but Petit Manseng is really the one that's giving the big fruit, the explosive aromatics, and it gives it more body and texture. So this is a really versatile white wine. It has some weight, and but also really fresh. And so the idea behind this wine is to create a wine that is at once fresh, but also has some texture, has some presence. And that blend is, I think, really interesting because it is not a typical blend even here in Virginia. Although both grapes grow here, you don't see those grapes blended very often. So I guess that's all about that. Liz can tell you a little bit more about the food pairing. Oh, and some shots here of the vineyard here. Beautiful tasting room, about an hour and 35 minutes from Richmond. This is beautiful estate. They have a restaurant on site and a tasting room where you can taste wines from around the state, not just from Early Mountain Vineyards. So they've partnered with a number of other vineyards from around the state. So really cool opportunity to get a sense of it. And you can see from here, the mountains off in the distance. So it's not only are the wines top rate, but you also have a beautiful tasting room and a great place to visit if you're out that way. And so this is the winemaker, Ben Jordan. As I mentioned before, he's the winemaker for both of these wines. And Ben's a pretty soft-spoken, really thoughtful guy. I really think that he's doing some of the best work in the state right now in terms of, I think, pushing the envelope on the one hand, but also, able to create wines like the Five Forks that I think are undeniably classic and feel. And so he's able to, I think, handle both realms of being experimental, and you'll see that more with the Lightwell survey wine that we're going to taste tonight, and also make things that I think are really that have a classic stately feel to them, like the Early Mountain wines.
So feel free to comment in the chat box to tell us what you think of the wine. John says he really likes it. I do too.
Oh, are they?
We're getting some comments.
Yes, someone asked, are they currently doing tastings? I believe they are, although I have not left my house hardly at all in a while. So I don't know what the status is. Their website will definitely list that, but I'll look into it. I'm not sure.
And as far as pairings went, we did something a little different, and I paired the white with meat and the red with seafood. Because of the texture and the body of this wine from the Petit Manseng and the fruit, I thought it went very well with our pork tenderloin that we have on the menu right now. It is braised in apple cider, as the Swiss chard is braised in apple cider, and it has a celery root gratin, and it very much goes with the wine. The pork and the richness go really well together. as well as the apple qualities in the pork and the Swiss chard go well with the wine. So doing it a little different, but I think it's a wonderful pairing. Does anyone else have any comments on the wine or how they feel on it? John, what's
They're asking if you can get it in RVA.
Yes, and I'm off the top of my head, I would have to look. Geez, you know, I don't know who currently has it on their shelves. Any independent wine shop in town would be able to order this. You know, it depends. I don't have a good answer for that off the top of my head. I know Elwood Thompson's in Carytown generally stocks it, and that's the one that comes to mind. But I think there are 4 or 5 others that do.
And I take this moment to, I don't know if I said it at the very beginning, but the wines that we discuss every program are always available through VMFA to go. It's a great opportunity. You can get VMFA to go Wednesday night, Thursday night, and Friday after 5, and pick up the wine and I guess the food as well. Curbside service is still available. Isn't that correct, Liz?
Yeah, and we also have the wine by the glass. After the lecture, we'll feature it on our by the glass menu. So if you just wanted to come up and grab a glass and see what it tastes like, feel free.
Wonderful opportunity to visit VMFA, and remember that we're open traditionally 365 days a year, and Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday nights as well. So a great opportunity to come in, see the exhibitions, and grab that glass of wine and some wonderful food. So.
Doug on the chat says that Whole Foods has it in stock right now, and Jennifer says if you order 3 bottles directly from their website, shipping is free for Richmond. So.
Excellent. Okay. And now it's my turn to talk about the first artist of the night, George H. Ben Johnson. And I think this absolutely gorgeous painting called Idol of Virginia Mountains. And I think I've had the opportunity to travel with my family and visit a lot of Virginia wineries over the last number of years, and to be there at really a lot of different locations where you look out and you see the Blue Ridge Mountains, and this painting is really evocative of what we see. If you're driving Interstate 81, if you're traveling up through the Shenandoah Valley, you know, moving around the state and catch the right time of day, you've seen this. But in this painting, George H. Ben Johnson places us on top of one of the taller mountains or hills in Virginia. And we get to look over this remarkable landscape just as the sun's setting or rising. We certainly see why we call them the Blue Ridge Mountains. We see those touches of yellow paint that suggest that the sun is just kissing the top of the mountains. And when you visit the painting in person, you can really become totally absorbed by the depth of all these subtle colors. You're always looking around the canvas and seeing the greens, the oranges, the different shades of blue. You can really look at it for a long time. And this painting is featured on VMFA on the Road, as we'll see. It's from, can the controls be hidden while we are admiring the art? The art, it's very disturbing. So I will leave that to our person in control behind the scenes. I don't know how to do that. There we go. And this painting was done in 1945, and Johnson was born in 1888 and lived until 1970. A remarkably interesting and important African-American artist in the United States that not a lot of people know about. And it's great to have the opportunity to share him and his art, and more than just this painting, with all of you tonight, as well as everyone that comes to the Artmobile to view the exhibition. One of the cool things about this painting is it's the first African-American work of art that the VMFA actually purchased. And as you can see, for those of you who don't know, that little number you see at the bottom is a museum number. It says this painting came into our collection in 1945, and it was the 10th and the 30th. So that's a secret on how to read that when you look at labels in museums. The other two pieces of African-American art that came in during the war years, that 43 to 45 time slot, were actually Jacob Lawrence's Subway, Home from Work, and Leslie Bowling's Cousin on Friday, but both of those works were private donations. So I think it's important to think about how the VMFA opened in 1936. It was the first state art museum. It vowed to serve all Virginians. And in those years that we stepped forward and not only accepted those donations of African-American works, but actually used the endowment we had for purchasing artworks to buy this amazing piece by Johnson. And if we look at the next slide, here's a great portrait of Johnson when he was older. This is another work that we actually have in the collection from him that came into the collection in 2016. Adkins, Ethiopian writer, 2012 BC, painted this watercolor on paper in 1928. And when we look at Johnson, he didn't do a lot of landscapes. He's probably best known for political cartoons, which we'll get to, and works like this that focus on the subject of Ethiopian history. And his goal was to create artwork that made African Americans proud of their history. He wanted always to create beauty, and he always wanted to make us think. So let's move on to the next image. And here are two great examples. In 1919, he was hired to become a cartoonist for the Richmond Planet, which was one of the most important African-American newspapers in America and was also the longest continuously running African-American newspaper. Here's one called The Balance of Power from September 13th, 1919, and The Call of Time. I invite you to go to sort of our sister institution, the Library of Virginia. You can go online and pull these cartoons up. They have them in their collection, and you can zoom in, and it's much easier to read, even though they are sort of scans of the original cartoons. And let's move on to one other image. Thanks. This Way Up. And here's a portrait of Johnson, the publisher of the Daily Planet. John Mitchell Jr. Was the original cartoonist for that newspaper. And he stepped down as cartoonist, although he remained publisher, and hired Johnson. Johnson had a remarkable history during his lifetime. He was a singer. He was a tailor. He had many other jobs, and he was basically self-taught as an artist. He was also an elevator operator and a mail carrier here in Richmond, Virginia. He spent time plying his trade as a singer and a tailor in New York City, Philadelphia, Hot Springs, and here in Richmond. And he attended Hampton Institute, now Hampton University, and that's where he got his training as a tailor. The political cartoons were so successful that they were reprinted literally in newspapers around the world. And in 1917, a book was published of the souvenir cartoons. And I just checked, and I went online to places like Amazon, and you can actually buy reproductions of his book of souvenir cartoons. And I'll warn you, they're not cheap. they're rather expensive, and those are the reproduction ones. But I think, again, Johnson is underserved in art history, and he's someone that we should be very proud of in Virginia, and that you should get to know more. So we'll move on to the next image. And this last image I'm going to show tonight, this is the Richmond Planet. From December 6th, 1919. And again, very powerful image that really talks about segregation, about Black issues, not only in the South, but throughout the United States at that time. And I think in a lot of ways they continue to be prescient today. So again, I invite you, this is also scanned from the Library of Virginia. So check out George H. Ben Johnson. And next. And not to take too much time, but as I said, the current exhibition is on the VMFA on the Road Artmobile, and there's an image of it in front of the museum. And I'm hopeful that all of you had had an opportunity to see the truck, which is usually parked at the museum, but also had an opportunity to go on it since it premiered in October 2018. This is the second exhibition, the Virginia Landscape Show. And let's take a look inside the Artmobile with the next image. And here's a visitor looking at that Idols of Virginia painting, and it's actually hanging next to a photograph by the next artist that we'll talk about later in this evening. And I have one more shot to show you. A couple of folks, we were slowed down, of course, by the COVID pandemic, but we have been out on limited travels throughout the state, and will continue to, starting in February, again, actually at a location in Richmond, and then moving toward the Eastern Shore, bringing VMFA's art around the state to you. And I want to just mention briefly that you can go online and take a virtual tour of this exhibition. And the funniest thing about that tour is me. So ignore me and go on directly into the Artmobile and learn more about all these artworks. There are also interviews with several of the artists featured in the exhibition, and that's on our VMFA YouTube channel. So let's learn more about wine. Okay.
Thank you, Jeffrey. That was great. So the painting was, I think, so evocative of the Shenandoah Valley landscape. And to me, it's one of those landscapes that, you know, if I'm homesick, I'm traveling, like that's one of the areas of the state that comes to mind because it really feels so quintessentially Virginian. And Lightwell Survey is also a project that is based around the Shenandoah Valley. So I think there's a real nice tie-in there. This is a collaborative project that was started, I guess, about 4 or 5 years ago. Started by Ben Jordan and 2 partners, Sebastian and Jay Zutant from Washington, D.C. We're in the restaurant business up there. And the idea was, you know, Jay and Sebastian were really impressed with the work that, that Ben had done at both Virginia Wine Works and at Early Mountain Vineyards, and approached him knowing that his family had a vineyard in the Shenandoah Valley, but was not yet, you know, commercializing their own wines. But the idea was hatched over a couple of conversations, meetings at a restaurant. Not sure exactly where it is. I think up in the DC area, most likely, by the name of Lightwell. And then the concept for the project was hatched there. The idea here being that the partners, including Ben, wanted to explore the potential of grape growing and winemaking in the Shenandoah Valley, which up until this point had been largely you know, on the sidelines. Although we have over 300 wineries in the state, I think I mentioned this earlier, there's only about roughly 20 of them in the Shenandoah Valley. Part of that really has to do with demographics and the fact that the population centers are not centered along that corridor. So you have more wineries in Northern Virginia and Charlottesville areas. So as a Shenandoah Valley native, Ben felt like it was an area of the state that had a lot of potential for grape growing. Certainly, if you drive through there on a sunny day, it is not difficult to imagine vineyards, you know, in a lot of these areas that are, you know, just pasture lands right now. It's a pretty epic landscape. So there's a lot of elevation differences. So there's a lot of potential for grape growing there. And Ben, as a native of that part of the state, saw that. And you know, Sebastian and Jay saw that Ben was, you know, I think very well suited to bring that alive. So the Lightwell Survey project is a more experimental take, and as far as the winemaking, whereas, you know, Early Mountain tends more towards classic combinations of Bordeaux varieties, grapes like Sauvignon Blanc as well. Lightwell survey is a little bit more interested in pushing some boundaries. One of the things that really helps them is that they are not vineyard owners themselves. So it's not an estate, winery. You can't go there and see their vineyards. They're based in Waynesboro. And this allows them some flexibility because they get to choose the growers that they work with. Ben's experience at Virginia Wine Works and at Early Mountain has put him in contact with a lot of growers from that part of the state. So he has people that he has handshake deals with that he's working with year in and year out. And really the idea here is to showcase the potential of the Valley and also kind of open up the conversation of what Virginia wine has been and what it could be. I think for a while, I was working in retail for many years, and there was a kind of, I noticed a complacency amongst a lot of people in the wine industry after a rush from the 1970s to, the early 2000s to figure out what Virginia wine is. Once it was kind of established that, hey, Virginia wine is all about, Cabernet Franc and Viognier, and kind of selecting a rush to choose the strengths of Virginia wine. I think there a complacency set in where a lot of people said, this is expected. You go to Virginia winery, you're going to have a Cabernet Franc, you're going to have a Bordeaux blend. You're probably going to come across a Viognier. Maybe some places you'll find Petit Manseng, but really there was kind of a sameness to the offerings, at least at a lot of the places. And I think that was, on one hand, a recognition of what works well here. But also I think there was a sense that, maybe we had rushed to this kind of canonization of Virginia wine, or a kind of an establishment of what works and what doesn't work here pretty quickly, maybe too quickly. So that was kind of, I think, some of the ideas that really pushed this project. And so, Ben also believes that this is an area of the state that really has a very high viticultural potential, but it remains largely untapped. So even though you don't have a lot of wineries, you still do have quite a few grape growers in the Valley. And this is also a way that, that can bring a spotlight to them. On the website, they list the names of the vineyard owners and where they're located. So they're kind of, trying to shine a spotlight on that. And bring more recognition to the area. So for the wine, as you see, the label is also rather unconventional. So this is from a DC artist named John DiNapoli. John has since become a partner in the project, and it is this is a sequential label. So all of their labels, this is the 4th vintage release from Lightwell Survey. Each of their, I guess they're doing about 5 wines right now, has a sequential label that changes each year. So it tells a story. Obviously, we're at the dramatic climax of the story. I don't know who wins this altercation, but eventually we'll reach some climax in the next few vintages, I'm assuming. This is, so not only is the artwork, I think, kind of arrestingly different from most Virginia wine labels that you'll find. If you'll notice on screen, the blend starts out pretty expected, but then completely takes a left turn very quickly. So you'll see that this is not only 87% Cabernet Franc, but we have some interlopers in here, like Petit Manseng, Riesling, and 3% Blaufränkisch. So it's, this kind of clues you in that this is not a conventional take on Cabernet Franc. So this is a co-ferment of all these different grape varieties, so red and white, which is a little bit of a nod to the winemaking traditions of European vineyards. You still see some co-fermentation in parts of Italy and France in particular, but it is a long-standing tradition. But you don't see that here in the United States as much. It's a newer. It's an idea that is catching on, and you see it with more experimental winemakers. But to my knowledge, here in Virginia, this wasn't something that I had ever seen before Ben started playing around with this. This is a nod to the Rhone Valley, most notably, where they still do vinify Syrah with some addition of Viognier grape. And the reasons for this are, kind of in dispute depending on who you talk to. Some people say that it lifts the aromatics, or that it fixes the color of a grape like Syrah, that it sets it in is more vivid. In this case, I really think it's the idea here is that it adds some complexity, but it brings a lightness to the wine, so it's not as ponderous. And really, I feel like it pushes the aromatics a little bit more lifted. So I think it's 4 or 5 different vineyard sources from around the Shenandoah Valley. Grapes are co-fermented, as I mentioned. 10% of the grapes are fermented whole clusters, so they are not destemmed. Again, that's another old world technique that is commonly used, but in Virginia, especially with Cabernet Franc, not something I've seen a whole lot. So it's a little bit more of tends to bring a little bit of more aromatic lift to the wine, and also some freshness. It's a little bit more fruity as compared to a traditional like Bordelais style fermentation where you would destem all of the Cabernet Franc. Spends 10 months in neutral French oak barriques, and then is bottled unfiltered. I was bottled last year in July, and then just a tiny bit of sulfur to stabilize the wine at bottling. And production here, I didn't mention, is really quite small. It's 152 cases per, well, actually it says 149 on the label, 152 on their website. So somewhere around 150 cases for this. So the production is very small, which means the wines are not, they're well distributed, but not everywhere. But it also, I think more importantly, they're not, because they're not vineyard owners, they're allowed to experiment. They're not locked into a formula that they have to stick with year in, year out. So I think, if this was a 10,000 case production, those risks have to be dialed in a little bit. So I think this is a wine that really, to me, has been very exciting to work with and to showcase, because it brings an unexpected take to a category that I think a lot of people feel like they know pretty well, and especially with a grape like Cabernet Franc, which if you've tasted any Virginia wine, chances are you've tasted more than a few of these. This is a really, I think, unconventional and surprising take. So with that, I will go on. And I think there's, this is Ben's family's vineyard in Mount Airy Vineyard in Fort Defiance, Virginia, where he lives. And part of the grapes that go into this wine are farmed there, but it's only a portion. It's a very small property. And then there's Ben again, same picture as before. And I'll throw it to Liz.
Yeah, so if we want to taste the wine too, we didn't really.
Oh yeah, I'm so sorry. I was rushing through it.
I'm happy.
I can't do both at the same time.
Do it all, if everyone wants to taste the red. I think it is really interesting. I know Matt, you showed me a white from them like a year ago, and we have it on the menu now. I think Hinterman, and I do agree that this Lightwell survey is doing some really interesting things. And this is my first time having Blaufränkisch and Virginia wine that I know of. So
Ben's family actually farms the Blaufränkisch on their property. And there's some also in Nelson County at Oxeye Vineyard. It's a variety, an Austrian variety that's not, it's not widely planted here in Virginia, certainly, but really compelling.
I thought it was interesting. You had the Riesling and the Blaufränkisch, which I always think of as Austrian German wines. And then the Cab Franc and the Petit Mansing, which are more, classical French in their thing. So I thought it was an interesting combo to go for.
It's a totally bizarre combo, and on paper it looks a little bit distressing. As a wine lover, I look at this and say, I don't know about this. I'm always skeptical.
You buy it. I want to know what it's going to taste like.
It's almost so. I feel like the blend on the back of this wine is so out there that if I knew nothing about this, if I picked this up and turned around the label, I feel like I would have to buy it because it just seems like a dare. It's so out there.
But it completely works. Catherine says flavorful though light. It is very light.
And that's intentional. I think a lot of Cabernet Franc in Virginia, at least, I think it's starting to change, but for a long time it seemed like everything was really trying to mimic the wine, or emulate, I should say, emulate the wines of Bordeaux. So Cabernet Franc always spent some time in small barrels. Usually, sizable proportion of them were new. So you always got kind of a toasty coffee note to it. And these were broad-shouldered wines. I mean, and they work really well in that style a lot of times. But I think the other predominant style that this grape in France is grown in, or that is transformed into, is in the Loire Valley. They're more elegant wines that are a little bit lighter in body, more acid-driven, and more, I'd say, more finesse-driven. Whereas the Cabernet Franc and Bordeaux tends to be more powerful, more intense. So this is really, I think, stylistically, is maybe some middle point between the Loire Valley and the Northern Rhone. I mean, this almost behaves more like a Syrah from the Northern Rhone, and certainly the blend would lead you to believe that maybe they had that in mind when they're picking out the blend.
Yeah, absolutely. You get the lightness, but you get a little spice. And I gave it a little bit of airing because I thought that would kind of bring it out a little bit. So those of you that think it's super too light, if you give it a little bit of air, it'll bring out some flavor to it. And that's why it's a perfect pairing. We have a delicious bouillabaisse on the menu, and the acid, the tomato, and the seafood goes so well with this. It's got a fennel broth, and then the bread is sourdough bread with brouillis, which is red bell pepper spread. Essentially, it's like a bell pepper mayonnaise. So that bell pepper and Cab Franc is a dream in heaven. That's what goes together the best. So this pairing, along with the white and the pork, I know it's a little bit unconventional, but it actually was perfect. We all got together and tasted it last night, and we thought it was fabulous. So I do think
I was going to mention that you had broken all the rules, Liz, but I think this works really well. I would also say that this really has, it doesn't smell or taste like Pinot Noir, but I think in terms of weight on the palate, feels more like that than a lot of Cabernet Franc, which tends to be a little bit more intense. So this is, I think, a red wine that is really well suited for maybe areas where a Cabernet Franc might not always go. This is also not really excessively herbaceous, which is one of the things that is a recognizable feature of a lot of Virginia Cabernet Franc, but it can also be a turnoff if it's a little too bell peppery. And I find that although if you search for it, you'll find that in here to some extent. It's really fully ripe, and so it's not distractingly green either.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. This is a good wine to buy if you're trying to select a wine for a table of people, and people are having different entrees and you don't know what to get, red or white, and everyone always this is a good red wine to kind of be a middle road for everything. It'll go with a lot. So the acid behind it will give it some creamy, will have it go with creamy or spicy foods, and the redness will kind of cut through some of your steaks and things of that sort. So it is a good middle of the road wine to go if you're looking for a pairing for lots of different things as well.
I'll say one last thing about it. I think for me, this wine has been so exciting too, because it is, I've been able to show it to people who are kind of cynical or maybe a little bit guarded about Virginia wine. Maybe they've had Virginia wine in the past, don't like it, or think they've seen it all, don't want to go there again, maybe. I find that this wine has been a really interesting crossover where it's really surprised a lot of people that are kind of diehard Francophiles, or people who just aren't traditional Virginia wine customers, as well as people who follow Virginia wine. Those people seem to, I think, both, and usually, they can be polarizing for some people at times. So I think it's quite exciting.
I agree. Good. Jeffrey, you want to turn on to you?
Sure. And we're going to look at our next artist in A View from Home, Landscapes of Virginia. And that's Holly Williams Moore, who I'm going to call Holly from here on out. I think we've become good friends. And normally we call him Holly. This is Appalachian Trail and Mist, Shenandoah National Park, 1994. And I thought this was, again, just the perfect image to pair with the wines and the foods that we're looking at tonight. This is a pigment print from 2010. It's from a film Negative. As we'll see as we go through, we're going to look at some of Holly's other images. Holly fell in love with photography at a young age. He went to Washington Lee University, got his degree. And while he was there, his love of photography allowed him to get a job as a stringer for the Richmond Times-Dispatch. And I think he was paid $5 for every photograph that actually made it into the newspaper, which sounds like not a lot of money, but Holly's a little older than I am, so I guess $5 was more then than it might be now, but still not much. This is just a great photograph. It's a large photograph. When you come on board the Artmobile, you could have seen the comparison of scale earlier when we had someone looking at it. And one of the things I love about Holly and the way that he talks about his love of the environment, of nature, and particularly of Shenandoah National Park, it's just invigorating. And it's, again, this is an important subject to talk about today. Holly, like a lot of landscape photographers, goes out and he knows the landscape because he's there often. And he goes out and looks to see what you can find. And when one opens their eyes as a photographer, or as anyone, and really truly sees what's around them and decides to go over the next knoll, it's amazing what you can discover. And Holly literally went over the knoll and came upon this little pathway and the fog that was starting to dissipate and the light from the sun that's sort of starting to burn it off, I guess. And you can just feel the light pulling you in. And I think it's also an incredibly timeless image. And it shouts Virginia and Shenandoah National Park to me, and it really shouts the Blue Ridge Mountains and the beauty of Virginia. So let's look at the next image. Just to give you an idea, I think the Shenandoah National Park is fascinating. We have so many beautiful parks and forestry lands that have been put aside here in Virginia, but Shenandoah National Park seems to me unique in the great distance that it runs from up outside of Winchester all the way down to Stanton. And it just rides that mountain all the way down, even though you really, the terroir, to go back to a wine word, really changes as you go up and down those mountains and into those valleys. So the next image, please. This is Ice, Orb, and Lace, January 21st, 1991. And I love that Holly gave us the specific date and the year that this was made. It feels like January to me. So I thought it would be great to include a couple of winter images. And it's in some ways the same, but the opposite of the first photograph we saw. The first photograph is about this space that goes on forever, and we feel like we can look through it forever. And here, Holly's brought us down to focus on this tiny detail, and through his mastery, really, of his craft, that is photography, we really get to dig around and look at those crystals. Aren't they wonderful? And still get that sense of the water flowing. And Holly uses a large format view camera. That means it has to be schlepped into the landscape with the film, with the lenses, with the tripod. He's got a backpack that he's carrying sometimes miles and miles, and then setting it up and then using that camera close up to get that detail. That before the advent of digital photography, and now digital has sort of come a long way and can do remarkable things. But when this photograph was made in 1991, a large format camera would really have been required to get the tonality, to get the crisp detail, and it's shot at a long shutter speed. That's why you get the water that's running behind it blurred. So you really get that sense of the motion of the water along with the frozen detail of the ice. Let's look at another photograph. Holly fell in love with photography and ended up working at the State Corporate Commission, the head of the State Corporate Commission. He had a long, wonderful career in law. And his wife knew he loved photography very much. And he tells a wonderful story And I should say that we have a video documentary. We interviewed him and shot him also in action with his large format camera. And he tells the story of his wife giving him his first more large format camera. And I know there's some photographers on here tonight. I know John's on here, who's a photographer. He'll know this very well. She gave him a Calumet large format camera, and they're fantastic for studio work. Not so good for schlepping out into the forest. They're made out of metal, they're heavy, and they're a monorail. She also gave him a remarkable gift, and that was the opportunity to take one of Ansel Adams' workshops in Yosemite National Park. And I love this photograph that Holly shared with us. That's him. He's the young man on the left, and there's Ansel with his sunglasses raised up, leading that multiple week workshop. And they lived, they photographed, they ate together, they talked about photography in the floor of Yosemite National Park. And so I think Holly absorbed a lot from Ansel. We should mention here that VMFA is mounting a large, incredible Ansel Adams exhibition that's actually opening this month down in Martinsville and will be coming to VMFA next fall. It's curated by Chris Oliver, and I'm the educator on it. And there are prints you'll have never seen before, and it's an approach to Ansel Adams that no one's ever seen before. We include the idea that Ansel talks about, and that Holly knows very well, that creating a beautiful black and white photograph is like creating a musical score. And Ansel said, a piano has 88 keys, black and white, play all the keys. And working with the zone system, a beautiful black and white photograph has many, many, many different tonalities from absolute black to whitest white. So let's look at another of Holly's images. There we go. Oh, first, because we are talking about the influence that Ansel had on Holly and frankly on all of us in photography. This is Monolith, the Face of Half Dome. It's Yosemite National Park from 1927, an early print by Ansel from his work in Yosemite. And I love this photograph of Ansel at work on top of his station wagon. That's such a traditional image of Ansel. He always built a platform on top of his cars to climb up on. And as you can see, that's from the 50s. It's wood paneled station wagon. And there he is, and in this case, using this huge 8x10 view camera that he's working with. And keep in mind, Holly, Ansel, anyone with a view camera, you can sort of get a sense of that black cloth that he's holding there. And once he looks through that camera, he puts the cloth over to see the screen and to focus. And the image on that screen is upside down and reversed. So that's something else you have to become very used to looking at when you're a photographer working large format like that. And let's move along. There we go. There's Holly today. And that's the view camera that he bought to take out into the wilderness to photograph, which is made of wood and folds up and is much lighter than an all cast aluminum camera on a monorail. And I shot this the day that we were doing the documentary on his work with him. We went over to the pump house, but you would never know it looking at the photographs he made. If you want to, during the pandemic, go somewhere, get out of your car and walk 100 feet and turn around and feel like you're perhaps in a national park. We have it right here in the city and it's free. So take advantage of that. And I want to thank Holly very much for sharing a lot of materials like that photograph of him with Ansel Adams with us, for working with us to create the documentary on him. I want to make a mention of, if you can see it, there's actually a book created of that exhibition that was published by the University of Virginia. And I have one more image to share with you, I think. And here, Big Meadows Pine Fog and Ice from 1991, Shenandoah National Park. And again, when I was putting this presentation together, even the local weather forecast promised me it was going to snow, and I was going to be so spot on showing you these images that I picked out. But I have it on good news from friends in other parts of the state that they did get some snow. So people, perhaps someone's watching in Virginia or elsewhere where they do. And I also learned this week there are 12 more weeks when Richmond could possibly get snow, according to the local TV weatherman. It is incredibly difficult to make a photograph like the first image that we saw by Hulley, or by the image of Half Dome that we saw by Ansel Adams. We get used to seeing all those incredibly dramatic blacks and those beautiful contrasts and how all those tonalities move together. It is remarkable to be able to make a black and white photograph that captures all the nuance when the image is predominantly white. So again, I really want to call out that idea of technique. I want to invite you to visit with Hulley via video and view our VMFA on the road tour, and also view some of the other artists' interviews that we did of artists who are involved in that exhibition. Let's go ahead and go to the last slide. Let's see, and someone, the title of the book, thank you for asking, is Shenandoah, Views of Our National Park. There you have it. And it is from the University of Virginia Press. And so you can look for it online or elsewhere through your local bookstore, perhaps. I really want to thank Matt and Liz for sharing so much information with all of us tonight. I have learned about, frankly, 2 Virginia wineries that I didn't know very much at all about, and I'm looking forward to trying out some of their wines. And I'm also looking forward to visiting Liz up in Amuse and having some of that wonderful food. And you're going to see me very soon, maybe tonight if I can get up there. And I also want to thank Kristen Long, who's behind the scenes and has been doing the technology part of tonight. We had actually a little difficulty getting up and running tonight, and she did a fantastic job of us bringing us in on time to start the whole program. I want to thank, again, Chase Bank for supporting this. And I want to remind you that Friday, January 22nd, we're going to have another Taste of Art, and we're going to focus on Blue Mountain Brewery. So come on back and continue to come back, because I think we love doing this. We love having you here. And hopefully we'll be doing this program for a long time, and we'll probably have some other visiting guests like me. And hopefully we can bring Matt back as well. So have a great evening. Thanks so much.
Thank you.